In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars burned like ancient embers and planets drifted in silent orbits, humanity had ventured far beyond its cradle. The galaxy was a tapestry of civilizations, each with its own history, culture, and ambitions. Among them stood the Jacral, a species as enigmatic as they were feared. Their empire spanned countless systems, ruled by an iron will that brooked no dissent. At their helm was Queen Valithra, whose beauty was matched only by her ruthlessness. She was a being of contradictions, regal yet ferocious, calculating yet impulsive, revered yet despised even within her own ranks. The Jacral were not conquerors out of necessity but rather out of ideology. They believed themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution, destined to bring order to what they saw as the chaotic sprawl of lesser species. To resist them was to invite annihilation. To submit meant becoming little more than pawns in their grand design. Humanity, however, had refused both options. When the Jacral first arrived at Earth's doorstep centuries ago, humanity had been on the brink of collapse, divided, war-torn, and technologically inferior. Yet something stirred deep within the human spirit when faced with extinction. From the ashes rose unity, resilience, and defiance. The Terran Alliance was forged from fire and blood, a coalition determined to protect Earth and its colonies from domination. For decades, skirmishes erupted across contested sectors. Battles raged on barren moons, asteroid fields, and lush jungle worlds. Each side claimed victories, but neither could deliver a decisive blow. Humanity fought with ingenuity and sheer tenacity, while the Jacral relied on overwhelming firepower and superior technology. It was a stalemate built on mutual hatred, fear, and mistrust. But beneath the surface of this endless conflict lay stories untold, moments where individuals transcended the boundaries of war, if only for fleeting instants. Among those who bore witness to such moments was Captain Elias Drake, a soldier whose name had become synonymous with bravery and sacrifice. He wasn't born into privilege or fame. Instead, he came from one of Earth's overcrowded megacities, where survival often depended on wit and grit. His journey to the stars began not with dreams of glory but with a simple desire to escape the suffocating grip of poverty. What set him apart wasn't just his skill in combat, it was his unshakable belief in the inherent worth of every life, no matter how alien or hostile it might seem. Elias commanded a small unit known as the Vanguard Squad, tasked with reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. These operations were perilous, requiring stealth, precision, and nerves of steel. Time and again, Elias led his team through impossible odds, earning accolades from superiors and loyalty from subordinates. Yet there was another side to him, one rarely seen outside the confines of his quarters. In quiet moments, he would stare at the stars through the viewport of his ship, wondering about the lives unfolding on distant planets. Was there truly no room for understanding between humans and the Jacral? Or was the cycle of violence inevitable? It was during one such mission that fate intervened, setting into motion events that would ripple across galaxies. The Vanguard Squad had been sent to investigate reports of a hidden Jacral outpost on a remote moon shrouded in perpetual twilight. Intelligence suggested it housed critical supplies and communications equipment vital to the enemy's operations. For Elias, it was just another assignment, a chance to strike a blow against the oppressors. Little did he know, this mission would challenge everything he thought he knew about war, compassion, and the fragile threads that bind all sentient beings. As the dropship descended through the moon's thick atmosphere, Elias tightened his grip on the controls, feeling the familiar hum of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Beside him sat Lieutenant Mara Chen, his second-in-command, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain below. The rest of the squad, Corporal Jax, Specialist Rhea, and Private Kale, were strapped into their seats, weapons ready, faces etched with determination. This was no ordinary infiltration. The outpost was heavily fortified, guarded by automated turrets and patrols of elite Jacral warriors. Failure was not an option, but success seemed equally improbable. The landing zone was a narrow canyon carved into the moon's rocky surface, barely wide enough to accommodate the dropship. As soon as the engines powered down, Elias signaled for silence. The air outside was thin and frigid, carrying the faint metallic tang of alien machinery. One by one, the team disembarked, moving swiftly toward the shadows cast by jagged cliffs. Their movements were precise, honed by years of training and countless missions. Every step, every breath, was calculated to avoid detection. They reached the perimeter of the outpost without incident, slipping past the first line of automated defenses thanks to Ria's expertise in hacking. Her fingers danced over her wrist console, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. "We're in," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Elias nodded, signaling the others to proceed. The compound loomed ahead, a labyrinth of angular structures and glowing energy conduits. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional whir of unseen drones patrolling the skies. Their objective was clear: locate the central hub where the communications array was housed and disable it. If successful, the operation would sever the outpost's connection to the broader Jacral network, rendering it vulnerable to future strikes. But as they moved deeper into the facility, navigating dimly lit corridors and avoiding patrols, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The layout didn't match the schematics provided by command, and the absence of resistance felt unnatural. Still, he pressed on, trusting his instincts and the competence of his team. It was Corporal Jax who spotted her first, a lone figure huddled in a corner, partially obscured by the flickering light of a malfunctioning panel. At first glance, she appeared human, though closer inspection revealed subtle differences: elongated limbs, translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the artificial glow, and eyes that glowed an otherworldly silver. She was clearly injured, her body trembling as if struggling to stay conscious. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. No one spoke, no one moved. The mission parameters hadn't accounted for this: an unarmed, wounded individual, seemingly abandoned by her own kind. Elias knelt beside her, his weapon lowered. "She's alive," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The woman, or whatever she was, stared up at him, her expression unreadable. There was no fear in her gaze, only a profound exhaustion, as though she had long since given up hope. "Sir, we can't afford distractions," Mara hissed, her tone laced with urgency. "If we don't finish the job, none of this matters." "I'm aware," Elias replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision before him. He turned back to the mysterious figure, studying her injuries. A deep gash ran along her side, and her breathing was labored. Whatever she was, leaving her here would mean certain death. And yet, helping her could jeopardize the entire mission, and perhaps the lives of his team. The ethical dilemma gnawed at him, pulling at the core of his humanity. Could he walk away knowing he had chosen duty over compassion? Without another word, Elias removed his medkit and began tending to her wounds. The act was instinctive, almost reflexive, driven by a moral compass that refused to yield even in the face of danger. His team watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to intervene or trust his judgment. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was soft, melodic, and utterly alien. Though none of them understood her language, the gratitude in her tone transcended words. In that moment, Elias realized he had crossed a threshold, one that would alter the course of his life forever. The woman's condition was dire, her injuries compounded by exposure to the harsh environment. Despite the urgency of their mission, Elias insisted on stabilizing her before proceeding. Using the limited supplies in his medkit, he cleaned and dressed her wound, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. The others formed a protective perimeter around them, their weapons trained on the darkened corridors. Tension hung thick in the air, but no one questioned Elias further. They trusted him implicitly, even if they didn't fully understand his actions. Once she was stable enough to move, Elias carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her as gently as possible. Her body was surprisingly light, almost ethereal, and her skin radiated a faint warmth despite the cold surroundings. She looked up at him, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. Though communication remained impossible, her presence alone seemed to convey a depth of emotion that transcended language. Elias felt a strange connection forming, an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of shared vulnerability. Navigating the outpost with their unexpected charge proved more challenging than anticipated. The corridors grew narrower and more labyrinthine, forcing the team to move slower and with greater caution. Every sound echoed ominously, heightening their awareness of potential threats. At one point, they narrowly avoided a patrol of Jacral soldiers, retreating into a maintenance alcove until the danger passed. The woman clung to Elias, her trembling intensifying as the armored figures marched by. He whispered reassurances, though he doubted she understood. Still, his tone seemed to calm her, and she eventually relaxed against him. Despite the risks, Elias found himself growing increasingly protective of her. There was something about her fragility, her resilience in the face of abandonment, that resonated deeply with him. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to ensure her safety, even if it meant deviating from the mission. His resolve hardened with each step, reinforced by the silent nods of approval from his team. They may not have agreed with his decision initially, but now they stood united, bound by a shared commitment to do what was right, not just for humanity, but for all sentient beings. Eventually, they reached a secure chamber where they could regroup and assess their next move. Setting the woman down on a makeshift pallet, Elias turned to his team. "We'll split up," he said firmly. "Mara, take Jax and secure the comms hub. Rhea and Kale, stay here and guard her. I'll keep watch outside." His orders were met with nods of agreement, though Mara hesitated briefly. "You sure about this, sir?" she asked, her voice low. "We don't know who or what she is." Elias met her gaze steadily. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is that she's alive. And as long as she's with us, she's under our protection." With that, the team dispersed, leaving Elias alone with the woman once more. He knelt beside her, offering a small smile. Whether she understood or not, he hoped she could feel the sincerity in his actions. For the first time since the mission began, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Who was she? Why had she been left behind? And what role would she play in the unfolding drama of this war-torn galaxy? Questions swirled in his mind, unanswered but undeniable in their significance. The revelation struck like a thunderclap, reverberating through the chamber and sending shockwaves through the hearts of Elias and his team. The woman they had rescued, fragile yet resilient, was no mere casualty of war. She was Queen Vaelithra herself, sovereign ruler of the Jakral Empire. The realization dawned slowly, pieced together from fragments of memory and observation. Her regal bearing, even in her weakened state. The intricate patterns etched into her skin, markings of lineage and power. And then, unmistakably, the insignia embedded in the fabric of her torn garment, a symbol recognized across star systems as the emblem of the Jakral throne. At first, disbelief clouded their minds. How could the formidable queen, whose name inspired dread among billions, lie so broken and vulnerable before them? Yet as Elias studied her features more closely, he saw it, the unmistakable resemblance to images captured during diplomatic broadcasts, propaganda footage, and intercepted transmissions. It was her. Queen Vaelithra. The very embodiment of humanity's greatest adversary. The implications were staggering, threatening to unravel everything they thought they knew about their mission, and themselves. For Elias, the discovery ignited a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Here was the architect of countless atrocities, the commander of armies that had slaughtered innocents without mercy. Yet here, too, was a being stripped of her armor, her authority, her invincibility. Reduced to nothing more than a wounded soul fighting for survival. Compassion warred with duty, morality with strategy. Should he exploit this opportunity to eliminate her, ending the threat she posed once and for all? Or should he honor the vow he had silently made, to protect her, regardless of who she was? His team grappled with similar turmoil. Mara clenched her fists, her jaw tightening as she wrestled with the temptation to act decisively. Jax muttered curses under his breath, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Rhea stared at the queen with wide eyes, her usual composure shaken. Only Kale remained eerily calm, his youthful face betraying a mix of awe and confusion. "What do we do now?" he asked softly, voicing the question that hung heavy in the air. Elias took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We stick to the plan," he said firmly, though his voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. "Finish the mission. Disable the comms hub. Then, we figure out what comes next." His words offered little comfort, but they anchored the group, providing a semblance of direction amid chaos. As the others resumed their tasks, Elias knelt beside the queen once more, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and resolve. He couldn't deny the enormity of the choice before him. To kill or spare her wasn't merely a tactical decision, it was a test of humanity itself. Vaelithra stirred slightly, her glowing eyes fluttering open. She gazed at Elias, her expression unreadable yet profoundly intimate, as though she sensed the storm raging within him. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if she understood the gravity of her situation, or if she, too, was grappling with questions of identity, purpose, and redemption. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. And the choices they made in the hours to come would shape not only their lives but the destiny of two warring civilizations. As the reality of their situation settled over the team, the weight of their predicament became palpable. The initial shock of discovering Queen Valethra's identity gave way to a cascade of moral quandaries and strategic dilemmas. Each member of the vanguard squad grappled with the implications in their own way, their reactions as varied as their personalities. Mara, ever the pragmatist, argued vehemently for immediate action. "This is our chance to end the war," she insisted, her voice low but urgent. "One shot, sir. That's all it takes. We neutralize her, and the Jacques crumble." Elias listened intently, his brow furrowed in contemplation. He understood Mara's logic, perhaps better than anyone else, but the idea of executing an unarmed, injured being, regardless of her crimes, gnawed at his conscience. "And then what?" he countered, his tone measured yet firm. "Do we become monsters to fight monsters? Is that the legacy we want to leave behind?" His words hung in the air, prompting a tense silence. Jax shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to Elias evident but strained by the enormity of the decision. "It's not just about us," he interjected hesitantly. "Think of everyone back home. The families who've lost loved ones. The planet's still under Jacques control. Can we afford to let her live?" Rhea, usually reserved, surprised everyone by speaking up. "But look at her," she said quietly, gesturing toward the Queen. "Does she look like the tyrant we've been fighting? She's hurt, scared, maybe even ashamed. Doesn't that count for something?" Her perspective added another layer to the debate, forcing the group to confront the humanity, or lack thereof, in their enemy. Kale, the youngest and most idealistic of the squad, nodded fervently. "She trusted us enough to let us help her," he pointed out. "Maybe she deserves a chance to prove she's more than what we think." The discussion grew heated, voices rising as tempers flared. Yet amidst the discord, Elias remained steadfast, his leadership tested but unwavering. "Enough," he commanded, silencing the room with a single word. "We're not making this decision lightly. But we're also not doing it impulsively. Let's focus on completing the mission first. Once we've secured the outpost, we'll decide what happens next, as a team." His resolution calmed the group, though the tension lingered like a storm cloud waiting to break. Meanwhile, Valethra observed the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Though she couldn't understand their language, the intensity of their gestures and expressions spoke volumes. She had expected anger, hatred, perhaps even violence upon being discovered. Instead, she found herself surrounded by beings wrestling with their principles, torn between vengeance and virtue. It was a revelation that unsettled her deeply, challenging preconceived notions about the human she had long dismissed as primitive and ruthless. When Elias approached her again, his demeanor was gentle but resolute. He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze with an earnestness that transcended barriers of species and enmity. "I don't know why you're here," he said softly, though he knew she wouldn't comprehend his words. "But I promise you this. Whatever happens, I won't abandon you." His voice carried a sincerity that resonated within her, stirring emotions she had long suppressed. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to believe, however fleetingly, that redemption might be possible. The internal struggle within Elias mirrored the external chaos surrounding them. He wrestled with visions of the countless lives lost to the Jacques campaigns, juxtaposed against the image of the fragile queen lying before him. Could compassion truly coexist with justice? Or was mercy, in this case, tantamount to betrayal? As the debate raged on, both within himself and among his team, one truth became abundantly clear. Their choices would define not only the outcome of this mission but the very essence of their humanity. With the decision to complete the mission hanging precariously in the balance, Elias and his team navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the outpost with renewed urgency. The weight of their discovery pressed heavily upon them, each step forward fraught with the potential for catastrophic consequences. Yet, amidst the tension, a silent resolve solidified within the group. They would see this through, not as soldiers blindly following orders, but as individuals grappling with the moral complexities of their actions. Mara and Jax moved swiftly toward the communications hub, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The path was fraught with peril, every shadow concealing potential threats. Automated turrets scanned the area intermittently, their mechanical whirring a constant reminder of the danger lurking in the darkness. Mara signaled for silence, her hand gestures precise and understood without need for words. Jax nodded, his rifle poised and ready, as they slipped past another patrol of Jacral warriors. The enemy's presence was unervingly sparse, heightening their suspicion that something was amiss. Meanwhile, back in the secure chamber, Rhea and Kale maintained their vigil over Queen Velathra. The young private's earlier idealism had tempered into a cautious optimism, his youthful enthusiasm balanced by the gravity of their situation. Rhea, ever the technician, worked diligently to fortify their position, rerouting power supplies to create makeshift barriers and setting traps to deter any unexpected intrusions. Her hands moved deftly over her console, her mind racing with contingency plans. "If anything goes wrong," she murmured to Kale, "we hold this position until Elias returns." "Understood." "Understood," Kale replied, his voice steady despite the underlying tremor of apprehension. He glanced at Velathra, who remained eerily still, her glowing eyes tracking their movements with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile truce born of shared vulnerability. Kale found himself wondering about her story, about the circumstances that had led her to this moment. Was she truly the ruthless tyrant they had been taught to fear, or was there more to her than met the eye? Back at the communications hub, Mara and Jax encountered their first significant obstacle, a biometric lock securing access to the central control panel. Mara cursed under her breath, her frustration palpable. "We don't have time for this," she muttered, scanning the device for weaknesses. Jax stepped forward, his analytical mind already formulating solutions. "Let me try," he offered, pulling out a compact hacking tool. His fingers flew over the interface, bypassing layers of encryption with practiced efficiency. Seconds stretched into minutes, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. Finally, with a soft beep, the lock disengaged, granting them access. Inside, the hub was a cacophony of blinking lights and humming machinery, a testament to the technological prowess of the Jacral. Mara wasted no time, connecting her portable disruptor to the mainframe. Lines of code scrolled across her screen as she initiated the disabling sequence. "Almost there," she whispered, her concentration absolute. Jax stood guard, his weapon trained on the entrance, every nerve attuned to the slightest sound. The seconds dragged on, each one laden with anticipation. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility, piercing the relative quiet with deafening urgency. Red warning lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. "They know we're here," Jax exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. Mara's fingers flew faster, her heart pounding in her chest. "Just a few more seconds," she shouted, sweat beading on her forehead. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing moment. Elias, stationed outside the chamber, heard the commotion and sprinted toward the source. His mind raced with possibilities, scenarios unfolding in rapid succession. Reaching the hub, he burst through the doorway, his weapon raised. "Status," he demanded, his voice cutting through the din. "Almost done," Mara replied, her focus unwavering. Jax fired a controlled burst at the advancing patrol, forcing them to retreat momentarily. Elias joined the fray, his aim true and deadly. Together, they held the line, buying precious seconds for Mara to finish her task. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Mara slammed her fist onto the console. "It's done. The comms are down." Relief washed over the group, though it was short-lived. The facility's defenses had been triggered, and reinforcements were undoubtedly en route. "Fall back to the chamber," Elias ordered, his voice commanding yet calm. They retreated swiftly, retracing their steps through the maze-like corridors. Reuniting with Rhea and Kale, the team regrouped around Queen Velathra, who regarded them with an expression that bordered on reverence. The alarms continued to wail, a relentless reminder of the chaos they had unleashed. Yet in that moment, Amidst the pandemonium, a profound realization dawned on Elias. Their actions, born of compassion, courage, and conviction, had transcended the boundaries of war. They had chosen humanity over hatred, empathy over enmity. And though the battle was far from over, they had taken the first step toward forging a new path, one that might lead to peace, or perhaps something even greater. In the aftermath of their daring raid, the team regrouped within the secure chamber, their breaths ragged but spirits buoyed by their hard-won victory. The communications hub was disabled, severing the outpost's lifeline to the broader Jacral network. Yet the celebration was muted, overshadowed by the looming question of what to do with Queen Velithra. The alarms continued to blare, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Reinforcements would arrive soon, and their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Elias stood at the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over his team. Each face reflected a blend of exhaustion and determination, their earlier debates replaced by a unified resolve. "We need to move," he declared, his voice cutting through the din, "but before we do, we must decide her fate." He gestured toward Velithra, who remained seated, her luminous eyes fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on reverence. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air, palpable and inescapable. Mara stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "Sir, I still believe eliminating her is the best course of action," she said, her tone measured but firm. "It's not personal, it's strategic. Without her, the Jacral lose their figurehead, their rallying point. The Empire fractures, and we gain the upper hand." Jax nodded in agreement, though his usual bravado was tempered by hesitation. "She's right," he added. "Think about the lives we'd save. The suffering we'd prevent. Isn't that worth it?" Elias turned to Rhea and Kale, seeking their input. Rhea hesitated, her fingers absently tapping against her console. "I don't know," she admitted. "Taking her out feels wrong. Like we're stooping to their level. But letting her go could mean risking everything we've fought for." Kale, ever the optimist, spoke up with quiet conviction. "What if she changes?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What if this experience makes her see things differently? Maybe she can help us end the war, not with violence, but with understanding." The room fell silent, the weight of Kale's words sinking in. Elias exhaled slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. He glanced at Velithra, who watched the exchange with an inscrutable expression. There was something in her gaze, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or a plea for redemption. It was impossible to tell, yet it resonated deeply within him. Finally, Elias made his decision. "We're not killing her," he stated firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Not because I trust her, but because I trust us. We've proven today that we can rise above hatred, even in the face of unimaginable odds. If we execute her now, we lose that. We become what we're fighting against." Relief washed over some members of the team, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Mara opened her mouth to protest but closed it after a moment, nodding reluctantly. "Understood, sir," she said, though her tone betrayed lingering doubts. "But how do we handle her? She's not exactly easy to smuggle out of here." Elias considered the problem, his mind working quickly. "We'll improvise," he replied. "Rhea, rig up something to disguise her, anything to make her less conspicuous. Jax, scout the exit routes. Mara, prep the dropship. Kale, stay with her and keep her calm. We move fast and quiet." The team sprang into action, each member fulfilling their assigned role with precision. Rhea fashioned a crude cloak from salvaged materials, draping it over Velithra to conceal her distinctive features. Jax returned with intel on a service tunnel that bypassed the main patrols, offering a slim chance of escape. Meanwhile, Mara ensured the dropship was fueled and ready for immediate departure. As they prepared to leave, Elias knelt beside Velithra once more. "This doesn't mean I trust you," he told her, his voice low but sincere. "But it does mean I'm willing to give you a chance. Don't make me regret it." Though she couldn't understand his words, the sentiment was clear. She nodded solemnly, her glowing eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and resolve. With their plan in place, the team moved cautiously through the outpost, guided by Jax's intel. The service tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, its walls slick with condensation and lined with exposed wiring. Progress was slow, every sound magnified in the confined space. Vaelithra struggled to keep pace, her weakened state evident in her labored breathing. Kale supported her as best he could, whispering encouragement despite knowing she couldn't comprehend. When they finally emerged into the open, the sight of the dropship waiting in the distance filled them with a surge of hope. But their relief was short-lived. A contingent of Jacral soldiers appeared on the horizon, their weapons trained on the fleeing humans. "Go!" Elias shouted, pushing his team toward the ship. "I'll hold them off." "No," Mara protested, grabbing his arm. "We're not leaving you behind." "There's no time to argue," Elias snapped, shoving her toward the others. "Get her to safety." "That's an order." Reluctantly, the team obeyed, dragging Vaelithra aboard the dropship as Elias turned to face the approaching enemy. The firefight was brief but intense, Elias's expert marksmanship holding the Jacral at bay long enough for the dropship to lift off. As the vessel ascended, he sprinted toward it, leaping aboard just as the hatch sealed shut. The team erupted into cheers, their relief mingling with admiration for their leader's selflessness. Inside the dropship, Vaelithra sat quietly, her presence both a burden and a beacon of possibility. The team exchanged weary smiles, their camaraderie strengthened by the ordeal they had endured. Yet as the ship soared through the atmosphere, leaving the outpost, and the remnants of their old certainties, behind, a single thought lingered in Elias's mind. What gift awaited them upon their return? And how would it reshape the fragile alliance they had begun to forge? The journey back to their base was fraught with tension, each mile traveled bringing them closer to a reckoning they could scarcely anticipate. As the dropship pierced through the atmosphere of the desolate moon, the team sat in uneasy silence, the weight of their actions pressing heavily upon them. Vaelithra remained cocooned in the makeshift cloak, her presence a silent specter that loomed large over their thoughts. Despite the physical distance between them, her aura of regality and mystery permeated the cramped confines of the vessel, leaving an indelible mark on each member of the vanguard squad. Elias piloted the ship with practiced precision, his hands steady on the controls despite the turmoil brewing within. His mind raced with possibilities, scenarios unfolding in rapid succession. What would Command say when they learned of their unauthorized passenger? Would they see the potential for peace, or would they view her as a liability to be eliminated? The uncertainty gnawed at him, yet he clung to the belief that their actions had been just. They had chosen compassion over vengeance, humanity over hatred. Surely, that counted for something. Beside him, Mara stared out the viewport, her reflection distorted by the streaks of starlight. Her earlier objections had softened, replaced by a reluctant acceptance of their decision. She glanced at Vaelithra occasionally, her expression a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Do you think she understands what we've done for her?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Elias hesitated before responding. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think she knows we could have left her behind. That has to mean something." Rhea, seated near the rear of the ship, adjusted the medical equipment monitoring Vaelithra's vitals. Her technical expertise extended beyond machinery, allowing her to provide rudimentary care for the Queen. "Her condition is stable," she reported, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "But she needs proper medical attention soon. We can't keep patching her up with field supplies indefinitely." Kale, perched on the edge of his seat, leaned forward eagerly. "Do you think she'll thank us?" he asked, his youthful idealism undimmed by the gravity of their situation. "I mean, if she really is their leader, maybe she can help us end the war." Jack snorted derisively, though there was no malice in his tone. "Don't get your hopes up, kid. Even if she wanted to, her people aren't exactly known for forgiveness." The comment hung in the air, a sobering reminder of the challenges ahead. Yet amidst the skepticism, a seed of possibility had taken root. The notion that their actions might spark change, however improbable, was enough to sustain them through the uncertainty. As the dropship approached their base, a sprawling complex nestled within a crater on a remote asteroid, the team braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. Command would demand answers, and the truth was unlikely to sit well with those who viewed the Jacral as irredeemable foes. Elias steeled himself, preparing to defend their decision with every ounce of conviction he possessed. He glanced at Velethra once more, her glowing eyes meeting his with an intensity that defied explanation. In that moment, he realized that their fates were intertwined, not just hers and his, but those of their respective species. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, the hatch hissing open to reveal a cadre of armed personnel awaiting their arrival. Among them stood General Hargrove, his stern expression betraying none of the emotions roiling beneath the surface. "Report," he barked, his voice cutting through the cool air like a blade. Elias stepped forward, his posture rigid but resolute. "Mission accomplished, sir," he began, his voice steady despite the knot of apprehension in his stomach. "The comms hub is disabled. However," he paused, glancing back at the ship where Velethra remained concealed. "We encountered an unforeseen complication." Hargrove's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "Complication," he repeated, skepticism dripping from every syllable. Before Elias could elaborate, Velethra emerged from the ship, her presence commanding attention despite her weakened state. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd, followed by a tense silence. The general's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "Explain yourself, Captain," he growled, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Elias took a deep breath, meeting the general's gaze without flinching. "She was injured, abandoned, and defenseless," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We chose to save her, not because of who she is, but because of who we are. Because humanity stands for something greater than vengeance. Greater than fear." For a moment, it seemed as though the general might order her execution on the spot. But then, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of doubt, perhaps, or a begrudging acknowledgement of the moral high ground Elias had staked out. "Take her to the infirmary," he ordered finally, his voice gruff but devoid of hostility. "And you, briefing room. Now." As Velethra was escorted away, her gaze lingering on Elias with an unspoken gratitude, the team followed the general into the depths of the base. The briefing room was austere, its walls lined with holographic displays and tactical maps. Hargrove paced before them, his frustration palpable. "You've put us in a precarious position," he began, his tone accusatory. "The political ramifications of this gesture could destabilize everything we've worked for." "We understand the risks, sir," Elias replied, his voice unwavering. "But we also believe in the potential rewards. Imagine the message it sends, not just to the Jacral, but to the entire galaxy. That humanity is capable of mercy, even in the face of adversity." The general stopped pacing, fixing Elias with a penetrating stare. "And what if she betrays us? What if this is all some elaborate ruse?" "Then we deal with it," Elias countered. "But until then, we owe it to ourselves to explore every avenue for peace. Isn't that why we're here? To protect humanity, not just from threats, but from becoming what we despise." Hargrove exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as though warding off a migraine. "You're walking a fine line, Captain," he warned. "One misstep, and you'll drag us all down with you." "I'm aware of the stakes, sir," Elias assured him. "But sometimes, taking a risk is the only way to achieve something extraordinary." The general studied him for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Very well. For now, we proceed cautiously. But mark my words, if this blows up in our faces, you'll answer for it." With that, the meeting adjourned, leaving Elias and his team to process the gravity of their situation. As they filed out of the briefing room, a sense of cautious optimism settled over them. They had taken the first step toward forging a new path, one fraught with uncertainty but illuminated by the faint glow of hope. And though the road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, they faced it together, united by a shared belief in the transformative power of compassion. Days turned into weeks as Queen Velethra recuperated under the watchful eyes of humanity's finest medical personnel. The infirmary, typically sterile and impersonal, had been transformed into a sanctuary of sorts, its walls adorned with holographic projections of serene landscapes designed to soothe the troubled mind. For Velethra, these images were both foreign and mesmerizing, offering glimpses of worlds she had never imagined. Yet it was the kindness of her caretakers that left the deepest impression, their gentle hands and soft voices weaving a tapestry of trust that transcended language and species. Elias visited her daily, his presence a constant source of reassurance. At first, their interactions were tentative, marked by awkward silences and hesitant gestures. But gradually, a rhythm developed, a silent dialogue that required no words. He brought her books, ancient texts and modern tales alike, hoping to bridge the cultural chasm between them. She listened intently as he read aloud, her glowing eyes widening with wonder at the stories of human triumph and tragedy. In turn, she attempted to communicate through fragmented phrases and expressive movements, her efforts clumsy but heartfelt. Over time, their bond deepened, built on mutual curiosity and respect. When Velethra was finally strong enough to stand, she presented Elias with a small, crystalline orb, a gift from her people said to contain the essence of stars. Its glow pulsed softly, as if alive, leaving everyone in awe. Though its purpose remained a mystery, it symbolized something greater, hope for unity between their species. The general, though skeptical, recognized the potential of this fragile alliance. Plans were made for cautious diplomacy, with Velethra agreeing to act as a liaison. As she boarded her shuttle home, she turned to Elias one last time, her gaze filled with gratitude and resolve. Though the path ahead was uncertain, both humanity and the Jacral had taken the first step toward peace, a peace born not from treaties or weapons, but from an act of kindness that transcended war. And as the stars shimmered above, they seemed to whisper that even in the vastness of the cosmos, compassion could light the way forward.